Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be sitting here today with someone who is not only a living part of TTRPG history, but also one of its most dedicated champions moving forward. Luke Gygax is obviously the son of Gary Gygax, the legendary co-creator of Dungeons and Dragons, and he's carved out his own powerful legacy in the industry as a game designer, as a storyteller, and of course, as the founder of GaryCon, a convention that celebrates the spirit of gaming and supports indie creators across the world. Luke, thank you so much for joining me and the Keshites and our audience today. I'm excited to talk about your passion for building community, the future of TTRPG, and maybe a little bit about Keshanar, get around to it. But thanks so much for joining us from your home in California, and it's great to have you. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, my pleasure, Dave. Thank you for having me on, and I was very excited. I found out about the Kingdom of Keshanar through you and your excitement and your passion for it at GaryCon, and your generosity in wanting to help the community by being a sponsor for the GaryCon charity auction. So I wanted to say thank you for that. You've done that 2 years in a row as Orthane Productions. And I just want to say it's been good luck because we've broken records both of those years. So in 2024, we raised about a little over $55,000. This year, I just wrote the check and put it in the mail, old school, for $92,250 to go to Children's Wisconsin Foundation, which operates as part of the Children's Miracle Network of hospitals and part of Extra Life. And they run the Wisconsin's Children's Hospital there in Milwaukee and help heal sick kids and do lots of great things for the community. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely, and it's a huge honor for us to be able to support that, and we plan to do it long into the future. If you'll have us, and also now we've kind of set a trend, so now we've got to kind of try to keep upping the number. But it's such an incredibly good cause, and I love how the kids are there. When you're throwing the auction, and you keep coming up with people keep submitting such interesting things to auction off. It's a great experience. It's also one of the liveliest events at GaryCon. People are there hours in advance to secure seats for it.
Yeah, the community is fantastic, and by no means do I wish to seek like a lion's share of credit for this fabulous event, the auction. I facilitate that happening. I encourage people to bring stuff. We donate a few things from GaryCon, but this is really driven by our community, the people, the attendees who come and donate from their own treasure troves, the vendors, artists who are there, and of course the very generous bids of the folks that are there at the auction. And yeah, there's a lot of passion for that. I mean, there were some crazy folks who bid an insane amount of money to have lunch with my wife Bushra, and that was just amazing. So no one will name any names. that was amazing. I mean, gosh, Stern Pinball this year donated. Not only did they bring pinball machine, the D&D pinball machine for us to play, which I was fortunate enough to do a little voice work on that. So I reached out to GaryCon, and they're like, yeah. So they brought several units to GaryCon, and then I essentially called Gary Stern, who came. He said, it's GaryCon. I'm Gary Stern. I should come there. He's not a role-playing gamer. He's a pinball gamer. But he showed up, and so I cold called him the morning, Saturday morning before the auction. I said, you know what? I thought I'd had this straightened out with some of your folks at your company, but I didn't. I apologize. So I'm coming hat in hand. Do you think you could donate one of these machines to this cause? And I explained it was the Children's Hospital. And he said, yeah, we'll do it. And so right there, that's just the kind of, he'd seen the community. He's like, you know what, this is a good cause. I want to support you doing this. And there you go. So, GaryCon's a special place. And I think there's a certain aura around it that really helps everyone, just have a wonderful time, meet, you can come there alone, and you're gonna leave with friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
With friends. And of course, the quality of games and all that comes together, people having a good time, and they're generous folk.
Yeah, you guys taught me the meaning of confam.
Yeah,
that's a real thing. Well, that leads me to my first question, actually. So, and it's a little bit about something we were talking about. If you could attend GaryCon in full cosplay, in total costume, that would be completely anonymous. A, what would you cosplay as? And B, what events would you most look forward to attending?
All right. So if I had the talent to produce some of the amazing costumes that these people
the Beholder one that year?
Just outstanding. It's incredible stuff. So if I had those skills and I could do that, I would want to go probably as a wizard because I like playing wizards. Maybe, and my favorite character was Melf. Melf is kind of like a 5 foot tall, 5.5 foot tall elf with no beard and kind of silver hair. So that would be tough for me to pull off, with the beard and everything. But a wizard, maybe I could pull that off. And secondarily, I would probably think I could go as the fighter on the back of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook that's wearing the brown, the kind of just a steel cap and the kind of the brown armor and then brown cloak and tunic and stuff, because that was based on my dad. That was based on my dad from 1976 or 77, and so I think there's a resemblance there. So I could cosplay that. I don't know if anyone would put it together, but I could definitely do that.
And it'd be a different experience for you going anonymously, for sure.
It would be, and but yeah, if I could pull that off. And then clearly the cosplay contest would be awesome. But I would just like to go and probably play some of those rare games that you don't get to see at other conventions. And that's going to be playing Braunstein with Dave Wesley. Dave Wesley's still around. And that was like 1968, I think, 68 or maybe even 67. Kind of came up with this idea, which was sort of a spark for the idea of role playing. You're each playing an individual in this fictional Napoleonic city of Braunstein, and you're a different faction. So there's military commanders, sure, but there's the mayor, there's the rebels, there's like the merchants, the commerce, various merchant groups, and you all have your victory conditions, and you talk to one another to try to influence their actions to achieve your goals, and you pass into the referee what you're going to do, and then the referee adjudicates what happens that turn. And so that was pretty cool. That hadn't been done before, where you're not just playing a military unit or, where each figure is representing multiple folks, et cetera, et cetera. You're kind of getting into a storyline, and it's more than just conquering, a piece of ground or whatever, seizing some territory. It's, your victory conditions are different. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, and that's interesting because that's sort of how the game evolved, right? So everybody was wargaming, like Dave Arneson and your dad were had this kind of wargaming clubs, but then they started putting stories around like the commanders and adding color, like what's going on with them, where are they from, and then interacting a little bit, and boom, like role-playing games.
Yeah, because, you could only get together and play so often, right? Because gaming was a lot less popular back then. And, wargaming was really a small niche. And so there might be 3 or 4 people in your town that would play Gettysburg or knew what wargaming was. And there might only be one other person that really was into it, and maybe just you. And you might have to travel a couple hours to go see somebody. And, you didn't have the internet and all these other great things that we had. And when you made a phone call, it was a long distance. You had to pay extra money. Yes, that's right, kids. There was this thing called the telephone that sat on a desk somewhere on the wall, and you had to dial with your finger numbers. And yeah, it would cost maybe 50 cents a minute or something, which is a lot of money. Anyways, so it wasn't, getting together was harder. So what they would do is they'd write newsletters, and then they would mimeograph, Xerox, kind of an old Xerox kind of idea. They'd mimeograph them off and send them around to each other. And for fun, for entertainment value, sometimes they'd talk about what their leaders were doing in preparation for the next battle. So there's going to be this great battle where people are going to come together, and then they'd write like some political statements, like, some propaganda or some taunting the other player, or, making fun of something, just stuff to kind of, you would goof around, you'd make jokes and that sort of thing, so that when you got together, you could have some laughs, and play your game on that Saturday, the once a month that you guys were able to play. And of course, when you did that, people started taking on some personalities with their leaders, right? Maybe they'd paint them a little special and that sort of thing. And so I think one of the ideas, one of the things that my dad had done is, even in Chainmail, which was a medieval miniatures game that included a fantasy supplement where you could include not just real world, fighting men, and catapults and siege engines and stuff. You could have a troll or, a wizard throwing spells or kind of cool things like that. That wasn't well received by every gamer, but by the way, the people thought, I told my dad, come on, Gary, this is kid stuff. We're serious war gamers. We're historians here.
Right.
That wasn't necessarily well received. That, and then he boiled down rules. Most of the time, a miniature or figurine would represent a certain number of soldiers, like 5 or 10 or whatever it is. But he had man-to-man rules so that you could fight. Each figure was an individual. And I think he took those and had people defeat, they defeated the defenders of a castle, and then he took their leaders in to go up and talk to the king, right?
Oh,
or whatever,
interesting.
the leader. And what do you want to do? And then he jumped into a secret passage behind his throne and ran away. And they had to chase him. And then there was some kind of creature down there that he'd, put together from the 5 and dime store and cutting Barbie's hair and he made a troll or something out of that. So there was like a way to do a little battle, and that was really neat, right? And Dave Arneson was on a similar path with Braunstein, because he was up there by Dave Wesley and doing his thing. And so he was like, well, what if we I think he was very narrative. And so he was like, well, why don't you take yourselves and we're going to play a fantasy Braunstein. And you're just yourselves and you're exploring. And he put them in a subterranean setting so that there was less choices, right? Because if you're out in the open, you can go anywhere. Well, I don't have time to develop everything. Here's your boundaries. Oop, now you go underground. And then he showed my dad that after a Gen Con. So my dad liked gaming. He wanted to game as much as possible. And as I told you, there wasn't many gamers around, right? So he was part of the International Federation of Wargamers. And in 1968, he started a convention in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, called the Geneva Convention, or Gen Con, which
started it all
into which grew into I think you're up to 72,000 people or something like that, ridiculous like that now. And they've moved to Indianapolis because they outgrew Wisconsin. There's nothing in Wisconsin that can hold 72,000 people, and entertain them for a week.
Yeah, here Indianapolis barely contains it. Yeah, we're going to Gen Con this year. It'll be my first, so that'll be an experience.
Oh, it's massive. Talk about polar opposite ends. I mean, Gary Con is really about the individual, experiencing the community. Gen Con is great, and you're going to see a lot of really cool stuff there. A wonderful place to do business and see all the new things that are coming out. But man, it is crowded. It is busy. There's no way you can really have quality time to hang out with your friends, in my opinion, at Gen Con. Great for seeing all the new stuff. Man, that dealer room is huge, and there's all sorts of cool stuff, but it's just, it's big.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about gaming, like, what do you prefer, DMing or playing?
I'll be honest with you. I grew up playing because my dad always, pretty much 99% of the time, was DMing. So I really like to play. I can DM. I think I do a good job DMing, and I do that more when I'm a guest at conventions and things, because that's, people generally want to have you DM a game.
Yeah.
But I truly enjoy being a player, and it's just the challenge of, what is the person putting in front of us? How can we cleverly, come with clever ideas to take what resources we have on hand, whether it's magical capabilities, magic items, mundane items, the skill sets of the character types that are there, and how can we best assemble a plan to overcome, whether that's avoiding, circumventing or defeating or, overcoming physically or destroying what that obstacle is in front of us. And I find that really satisfying and convincing, thinking along with the group to come up with that. So I find that pretty entertaining. But I mean, I'll turn it around because I think I know your answer, and I'm going to ask you the same question.
It's really both. It's really both, Okay. Yeah, and Marx Brothers, who's kind of like my co-creator with all of this now, he was, one of his titles on his card is DM to the CEO, and because and so like there's nothing like being in a long campaign with a really good DM, and people that you love playing with. And one of the things that he says is that my campaigns are like a love letter to my friends, because he puts so much effort and energy into it and gets so much out of it. And then of course it all changes and evolves based on player choices, and it's just an incredible experience. So I absolutely love playing also, but I do like DMing. And it's really 50-50 for me, to tell you the truth. And I do a little bit of both, and it's both have their own rewards,
It does, and there is really not it's a great reward as a DM to see the players kind of light up and come together, and they came up with something you hadn't thought of them doing, right?
Right.
And so you're trying to figure, okay, well, how does that work? And then, all right, yeah, man, I'm going to give them some points for ingenuity here. I'm going to let it go. And they come up with a big die roll, and they're just like their arms are up in the air. I mean, that's very satisfying to see that level of enjoyment and just that big emotion on the table. So, and honestly, I figured you'd be more on the DMing side, because I'm like, man, this just looking at the Kingdom of Keshanar and the materials just through the advertising and video snippets and things like that I've seen, and reading through the Kickstarter information, I can tell this is a passion project. There is like a lot of love that has gone in here, and I'm just like, what made you want to jump headfirst into Egyptian mythos as a basis for a fantasy setting?
It started in high school. So I went to, I was interesting. I was in the worst high school in North America. And then my uncle had just taken his company public, and he kind of rescued me and took me out of that and put me into one of the best high schools in North America, which is an incredible gift, great education. It's called Trinity College School. And it was sort of like Hogwarts. Yeah, and in fact, the whole Hogwarts thing is based on that sort of English boarding school experience. And that's what I got to have. In fact, our eating hall is identical to the one that you see in Hogwarts, because they are identical. Because ours is a model after the one where they film it. I think it's Oxford or one of the ones in England. Yeah. And so, but we did, of course, we didn't have magic or monsters, right? So that was the only thing missing, right? But we played cricket, which is Quidditch, essentially. And so I saw all those parallels until I discovered Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, well, we've got the magic and monsters now. And it was in those formative years, in our teens. And it was, because it was boarding school, we had a lot of time on our hands. And so it just took off, and we spent a lot of time playing. And then the first modules that I ever bought and ran as a DM was that I purchased. I got mostly homebrewed stuff, right? And it was the Desert of Desolation series by Tracy and Laura Hickman. And that really kind of got the hook in really deep for me, and really cemented my fascination for ancient Egypt, like the mystery of it. There's so many unanswered questions, and they necromancy, like they're all about the undead, and it just meshes so perfectly. Mummies, and like the original monsters, so it really meshes beautifully with Dungeons and Dragons and the system that that your dad really created. And it was they're kind of made for each other, and so then I homebrewed that for decades, and really seriously started playing it. COVID was a big, I think that was a big lift for us, in the whole TTRPG industry, because people were stuck at home and needed things to do. And we had VTT, I think Roll20 had come out, and maybe a couple others. And so that's when I started really hardcore, running that campaign, not necessarily with an intent to publish it, but it was so much fun and people got so much out of it. And so then I ran the whole thing 1 through 20 for 2 years, and they got a different group and did it again. And so by the end of that, I was like, all right, I need to think about publishing this. I mean, how hard could it be? I've got all these notes, it won't be that big of a deal. And wow,
it's easy.
Oh my God. And I've written some short stories and lots of papers and things like that. But to me, it seems like it's so much more difficult than writing a novel, because you have to just construct it in such a way as it can be digested by the players based on choices that they make and in order that they choose, right? Because you don't want it to be all on rails, and that's hard to do. And plus, you don't want to have a lot of expository, like you're explaining things. Like everything needs to be a paragraph or less that the DM says. And the way they learn about it is not by you telling about it or them reading about it, is by them experiencing it, right? So it's sort of the ultimate experiential enjoyment or learning platform, really. And but yeah, so it has been 100 times more work than I could have ever imagined. And of course, this because you've created lots of amazing things, modules and adventures and supplements. And but it's been really rewarding too. And now that we have we started out by going to cons and doing one shots, and we do a con a month. And we have the Kesha van, we have the Keshanar van, which we wrapped and we drive it around and with all the stuff in it. And it's so much fun to interact with players that way, and also helps with playtests, some of the newer content materials. Oh, yeah. But it was really that. It was really Tracy and Laura Hickman that kind of got that hook in and just never went away. And and no regrets. Like, it's been an incredible experience. And honestly, I think the biggest and best part is meeting people like you and folks at Gary Con. And Gary Con was my first con. Wow. 2 years ago. Yeah, that was my first con ever. And I've been playing for 40 years. I just never went to cons. It just wasn't a thing I ever did because I was an entrepreneur. And so I was always busy starting companies and stuff. And it was the year that you started Founders and Legends. Yes. And I came in and I sat down and I wasn't as in tune with all the creators and the personalities, but I knew who Mike Merles was, right? And so and Mike came in and sat down at my table, and I really wasn't sure exactly what was going on. And I was like, is he here to make an announcement or something? And it's, wait a minute, he's my DM? And it was like, what an experience. And so I figured, well, it's downhill from here, but it isn't at all. It's been incredible. And Founders and Legends this year was amazing. So that seems to be working out really well.
It is, and that's it's great that you came to the 50. It was basically the 50 years of D&D when you showed up, and so I'm kind of crazy, and how hard could it be? Again, I said, well, we could just have a smaller convention. People miss when GaryCon was just a couple hundred people. So why don't we just do a couple hundred person convention beforehand, and we'll focus a little bit more on old school stuff. And then we'll do a regular GaryCon. We'll take a couple of days off and set up the big GaryCon for the 3,000 person GaryCon. Of course, that's nuts because we were basically 12 days of conventioning.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, it's the 50th anniversary. Let's, it's smaller, so I'll have more time to do this. Let's just instead of doing a panel where we talk about each edition of D&D evolves through the ages or whatever, let's take a character. One character, or a group of characters, through a single storyline, the same story arc, right? And the characters will evolve through each edition of D&D throughout the adventure, right? Obviously, you saw what we came up with, but no one had, to the best of my knowledge, had never been done before. And we wanted to make it a tournament too, right? So you start as an OD&D character, and you follow this storyline, which we called it Ragnarok because it's inspired by my father's G series, the Giant series. And it was, we had to make up how this worked as we went. And it took, probably about 1,200 hours of total manpower or person power or staff time to develop that thing. But it was 16 hours of adventure across all the editions of D&D. And it was a great story. And we tried to pick iconic monsters and make it fun. And people loved it so much. They're like, when are you doing the next one? Because sign me up. And I was like, what? The next one?
Right. I remember asking you that. And you're like, oh, man, I don't know. I don't think we can do it. I was like, because GaryCon's a lot of work. But then putting another one on top of that. And I was really gratified and jumped on the ticket, the second that you did it again. Because it was such an amazing experience the first time. But what's interesting about the fact that you decided to use the same characters and you play the same characters is now those characters are becoming kind of famous. Amongst all the players, and so I think next year we're going to show up with Blarg t-shirts, and
we should, that's great. And I'll tell you what, I mean, honestly, if I can develop this is off topic, but there could be stories or a graphic novel that kind of follows along the same, because it's a really cool story. And some of the stuff you guys have done, we never dreamed it. We play tested the first one, Ragnarok, we play tested through that. And we're like, they're never going to survive. They're going to die because we got our butts kicked every time when we're doing it as the designers, right?
Oh, we didn't survive.
You guys did great. Well, most of you guys did great.
Yeah, our party got wiped out. But
did you?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, Jeb Cook wiped us out, and it was. But you know what? I had such huge respect for that because it's every once in a while, it just shows that not everybody gets a trophy. I mean, we all do because we all get to play, but that there's risk, and the risk really makes the experience more intense and more enjoyable, and so all of our party was like, we were okay with it, and it's sometimes that happens, TPKs happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's rough when that happens, but if you don't feel like your character is at risk then it becomes more like a superhero game to me. And some people like that.
Right.
That's not my cup of tea, as they say. So I really like that tension and then the victory, or even sometimes escaping, just escaping.
Yeah, surviving.
Field. Yeah, you made it out. That's a victory, and that's kind of cool. But of course, it's good to have a mix of those. Oh my God, we made it out alive. Versus, and then ultimately where you get to finally crush that big bad guy or that group that's been plaguing you, and that's just this giant climax. And that's how you tell a good story, right? That's how you build that tension and that excitement and get everybody involved deeply in the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Conclusion. And yeah, that's talking about immersing. One of the things that blew my mind, I had to look and say, what is this right? Did I mishear this? Did I get to a video game ad? Is you've got the whole city of Keshanar built in the Unreal Engine. So essentially it's like you can walk through the entire city if you wanted to. For some reason you wanted to go be a tourist in Keshanar, you can walk through there and look at stuff and even layer it and like go down the levels and that whole thing. Is that accurate? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it was an evolution. So, and it wasn't even entirely my idea. So when I was homebrewing Keshanar, I could you beg and borrow from all over the place, right? Not all the materials are original. You use a little bit of this, a little bit of that, because it's for your friends and it's a homebrew. It doesn't matter. So when I decided and the original map was actually a giant etching of Jerusalem. And because it was large format and electronic, and then I would Photoshop in pyramids, and I Photoshopped in like the water, and like the river, because it's the same. Keshanar is the same layout as Cairo, right? For geographically speaking, and and it worked great, except that it was sort of a medieval constructed city with like curly streets and that kind of thing, which is not how the Egyptians built things. But it worked fine, for what we were doing. And then when I made the decision to publish it, I was like, well, I need to get a new map. I need to first things first, right? Need a really good map. And so I went out and found an artist to help me redraw the map, and he did some stuff. I was like, I kept making changes, and he caught on real quick. He's like, why don't we just build the whole thing in Blender? 3D modeling tool. So that way, when you want to move things around and change things, we can do that. And then you could rotate it around and look at different angles. And I'm like, great, let's do that. So for 4 years, this guy and I, and he's in Hungary actually, and we built, building by building, just kind of recreated the whole thing, but loosely based on this sort of modified Jerusalem thing that I had built. But it looked really good, and I kept adding more and more kind of Egyptian themed stuff into it. And his name is Bella, and then when it was finished, I was like, you know what? I want to put it. We can put it into a game engine so they can actually walk around in there. Wouldn't that be cool? And so we dropped it into Unreal, and I did that with the help of Mitch from Masterworks Studio. And he's like, him and his team of Yas Miguel, those guys are really phenomenal. But the problem was all the buildings were too small, because it was no point in making them to scale when we first built it, because that wasn't really the idea. We're using it really just for the art purposes and to be able to take different views of it and everything. And that worked well enough. But then he said, well, this isn't really going to work. If you want to do it this way, we have to rebuild the whole thing. I'm like, you know what? We kind of have to anyway, because none of the architecture is really right. And the way the Egyptians laid things out was on grids and lines, and it wasn't, twisties kind of things like that. So we just completely started from scratch. And my illustrator, Jose, he's in Sweden. It turns out his background is in architecture. And so the way we went about this is, I studied, and I had been studying anyway, Egyptian architecture anyway, because one of my companies that I started was a building restoration business. We restored ancient temples in different parts of the world. And so masonry is kind of like, I geek out on that, right? So I wanted it to be really authentic. So I would look at Egyptian, temples and structures and kind of extrapolate. So what if you had magic? What if it was, over 3,000 years and you actually had magic, then things might be bigger, and because it's powerful. And so then what we did is I would sketch things up in paper, and then Yossi would actually make architectural plans for each of like the 33 temples and the palace and the important buildings in Keshanar. And then we take these plans, which I'll show you some of they're beautiful, they're beautiful full elevation architectural plans. And then we would give that to Mitch and his team. And then Yas would put it into Blender and build the building. And then, Miguel would, and then Yas would take it, and he was the Unreal expert. He would drop it onto the city, and I could move things around. I could look at sight lines, and actually it went pretty quick. So that was about 6 or 8 months to rebuild the whole thing in Unreal, which was a smart move because it needed to happen anyway. But yeah, now you can actually run around in there. And we didn't even really think about all the things in the future that the capabilities that enables. But one of the cool things that Mitch just added to the build is that, and this goes back to the original idea of putting in a dungeon so you can kind of control things a little bit. Now it's a big city. It's 25 million square feet. And it's I think it's 3 kilometers across or 3 miles across. So it actually would take you like half an hour just to walk across the Unreal City. It's a huge file. And but you never know where an encounter is going to happen, right? Where a fight's going to break out. It's going to be at the bar, is going to be in an alleyway, it could be anywhere, right? And so now you can push a button and it strips off the tops of the buildings and overlays a grid or a hex. And then you can adjust the lighting, and then you push another button, and you can send that to your VTT, and you got an instant VTT map.
That's crazy, and that's crazy good. I mean, that's because if it's that easy, then even I could use it, which is saying a lot. So
it's super easy to use, and Unreal is just insane. Like there's waves and water and like there's sunken ships in Corallinthor Bay in the harbor. You can go under the water and you can dive around in these sunken ships, and we can plant Easter eggs all over the city, and then
so you're ready for the Kingdom of Keshanar video game, right? Where you get to.
It's funny. I don't really have any real intentions of turning it into a video game. TTRPG is my passion, but I do want to create new tools, for DMs, and so that's and I think this could be the start of a trend. Other indie game studios, when they're creating their settings, might be interested in doing that. It was a challenge also to build the city out in such a way that all the adventure can happen there. Because typically in my experience, this isn't true for all of them. A lot of like Baldur's Gate and a lot of big cities are fully built out, right? But for the most part, it's easier to create a module where you do a few things here and then you go somewhere else and do the 3 or 5 things that are there. You exhaust the plot hooks, right? And you'd kind of move on to the next place. And that's a slightly easier way to do it. It was much harder to concentrate all the lore, in this one big city. I mean, it's in a country and there's other things, but for the first part of the adventure happens in the city. And so you can really go anywhere in the city and like there's something to do there. And the Unreal, it's also so funny. So now we have the Unreal, but then after we built that, we built this giant map of, the 2D map of Keshanar also, but we did it from the Unreal. So that becomes a source of truth, for like all things buildings. And we're excited about that, and we're practically giving it away for right now because it's a beta essentially. But we're excited to see how game masters use it. Players can run. It's not a whole lot to do there. It's not a video game, but you can walk up to buildings and click on it and get information about it. And but it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But I'm going to keep it completely focused on as a GM and player aid, for TTRPG.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you talk about kind of fleshing out the areas of the city and what's there. And as you walk down the block, what do you see? And as a younger guy, I was like, I don't really care about that stuff. All right, I got my longsword, I got my spell component. All right, let's go, blow stuff up. And my dad, so it's funny, my dad, a couple, when he was in the 90s, early 90s, he lost control of Dungeons and Dragons. He was making a game called Dangerous Journeys, and Mythos was the fantasy element of that. And he drew heavily upon Egyptian mythology for that, and really focused in there. So I got to learn a little bit more about Egypt and generally the Mediterranean area, where he was doing a lot of focus, and a bit in North America as well, which was kind of fun when he wanted to play test things in that area. So that was kind of neat because that was new territory, right? Not too many of the gaming community in the U.S. had really delved too much into Egyptian lore. And it's fabulous, with the magic and all that sort of stuff. And of course, you changed the system. It was Hika points and things like that were how you got your magic. Anyway, so that was kind of neat. And then when in the future, closer to when he passed away, he was working on developing up the city of Yigsburg for Castle Zagig. Different, legally different than Greyhawk, because and so for that, I think he had like 26 different districts or whatever it is in there, and really his desire was to have 26 books, one for each quarter, because he wanted it that detailed out where you knew what was going on, who was there, who are the players, what are the kind of the politics going on in that little area. And he thought that was important. And I remember play testing, whether it was in Yigsburg or elsewhere, I'd come in and like, okay, great, we're doing our game today. He's like, all right, fantastic, yeah, let's go to do whatever. Well, before you go to do that, you really need to provision yourselves. And I'm like, oh no. So we had to go to the souk and we had to haggle and we had to try to find all the various things that he could, play test those and the pricing and the haggling and all that. So, and he had so much fun doing that. And I was, 20 something. So I was like, oh, come on, Dad, can we please get to the good stuff, but I agree that it's important for, it's good to have. And of course, every party has different play style, and some people are not going to use it, but some people are going to, and some players are going to appreciate that so much. And it's going to allow some role playing or open up possibilities into, different adventure scenarios that people may not have imagined. That I think that has a lot of value. I think people really appreciate it. I guess it was a long way of me saying that.
No, absolutely, and I think all of the three of us, your dad shared that appreciation for detail, and you don't have to absorb it all or use it all, but it's there, and because it's so one of the things that I realized when we were texturing everything in the city is the hieroglyphics. And so usually what you do is just go grab stuff from the Book of the Dead or whatever, and whatever you can find online. Nobody's going to be able to read it anyway. But now, we're actually with our Egyptologist who we were talking about a little earlier, Dr. Jill Waller. That was a good decision on our part to bring her on board, because her depth of knowledge and about ancient Egypt has just been super enriching. So now when we put hieroglyphs up, well, got to run it through Jill. She's like, well, what do you want it to say? And it's like, and it's a back and forth, which winds up making the lore a lot more interesting. But now we can also if anybody actually goes to the trouble to try to interpret and it's not that difficult to do, right? What the hieroglyphs. There he is, the real star of the show.
He was sleeping and he got up and came over. He was giving me trouble. He didn't want to jump up here, but
yeah. Awesome.
But Grogu wanted to join us to say hi, so at least
hey, buddy.
Yeah. But yeah, I was blown away because I was I'd heard the podcast earlier with was it Jill Waters, Dr. Jill Waters? Yeah. And just kind of the fact that you had an Egyptologist, consultant there just to make sure that you guys were true to the mythos as much as you can be, because obviously you're taking significant liberties because there's magic, right? There's gods walking the earth. There's monsters. There's creatures. There's permutations of creatures that maybe appeared in Egyptian mythos, and ones that you probably made out of whole cloth. I would assume too. So I mean, how did you have a thought about that as you went into it? Like how are you going to balance? Because it sounds like you also, I didn't realize you restored ancient temples and stuff like that. I didn't realize so you probably traveled all sorts of cool places. How did you have a thought process or when you started about how you were going to mix? Hey, how am I going to add high magic to this? What I know about the real world, and to make it into an interesting setting, or did you just do it?
Well, I mean, I think we take less liberties than I think we wind up taking less liberties than I thought we would, because the ancient Egyptians had spells, and they had, in the Book of the Dead is a spell book with 200 spells in it. And they had monsters, thousands of them. Most of them were in the underworld, and the gods, for them, the gods did walk the earth. The Pharaoh was the instantiation of the gods, and the gods were very real to them, and just as they are, just as, our gods, today, so. But I think so. I've kind of, originally our tagline was sort of it's like Keshanar is like a ancient Egypt and a parallel universe if the gods, the magic, and the monsters were real. But I think it really needs to be modified so that the gods are meddlesome, are they make more frequent appearances, right? And the magic is more common. And same thing for the monsters, like so many monsters, actually, a lot of monsters, there's, gargoyles. So in December, I went to Egypt with some of our game design team. I figured that's something we need to do before. I'd been once before, like 12 years ago, really quickly, but we need to go and like see all the sites and talk to Egyptian Egyptologists and, really dig in. And it was interesting in a whole bunch of different ways. Because the lore is, first of all, it matches up so beautifully with D&D, with the system, and we learned a lot of really interesting things. Like, for instance, I was at the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut, and I was asking my guide. I saw there's scuppers, basically a gargoyle up there, and so basically, that's the original gargoyle. And chimeras, and there's a whole bunch of different creatures that have inspired, or like Apep, the great worm of destruction, kind of the big, quote, evil god, it might be an inspiration for early dragons, right? Because dragons can kind of evolve from worms, the concept of a dragon, and there's winged versions and winged snakes, and so it's the more we dig into all those authentic nitty-gritty things, and the more we unravel, the more it informs and enriches, the game world. And so that where it departs, of course, is in the history. It's not an historical role play, and I guess one of the big things that is a turning point in Keshanar is that we rely heavily on this concept of the separation between divine magic and arcane magic, and so part of the lore is that the people had kind of gone away from the worship of the true gods. And so one of the way that Ra and the other gods kind of moved them back is like, hey, if you come, realign with us, then, we'll give you divine magic. And because divine magic comes from the gods, right? And it's important because it's so different. A 20th level wizard could die of an infected paper cut without a healing spell. And also it gives you the power over life and death, which is, super fundamental to Egyptian lore also, right? Because they didn't believe in death, really. Death was just a transition, right? You survived after death. And they took all their stuff with them. Their pets, embalmed animals, and there was a whole industry for it. The estimation is that there are 70 million. Yeah, exactly.
Making sure Grogu is like, I'm taking you with, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Prowler. I'll bring Prowler in too. There are 70 million embalmed animals in tombs in ancient Egypt. Yeah,
I had no idea. That's a lot.
Staggering number, right? So that's how committed they were to their concept of the afterlife. It was very, very real to them. And so they kind of make this agreement about like what are the rules of that, and that's what the Phoenix Covenant is, which is sort of the arc of the narrative of the 3 campaign books in the series. But so one of the things that we do is Jill Waller goes through all of our stuff, and she points out, she makes footnotes based on everything. Because this whole thing has become a rallying cry for the Egyptomaniacs, right? Where the Venn diagrams of Egyptomania and TTRPG kind of overlap. And so we wanted to make sure that where we do have a departure, that we really point that out. And where we're digging in, into the lore really authentically, we point that out also. So in addition to the setting book, there will be like a whole separate PDF filled with, all the footnotes, and for the people that really want to dive into it. Yeah, like to give you an example, like I was at RetCon where we were running games here locally, and one of the things that I found out, to my delight, that the world's first D20 was invented by ancient Egyptians, right? Yep. And it was found in a tomb 2,200 years ago, and it was during the Ptolemaic period, so it's covered in Greek letters. But obviously they used it to play a game. But I was at retcon, and we created replicas of it, so it's part of our Kickstarter. And we put, the only change I made is they made it a little bigger, and I put, the Arabic numbers on there so we can actually play with it and roll it, because, my ancient Greek isn't so great. And I was sitting at the table, and there was a Coptic priest who was a player, and he looked at this and he's like, "Oh, you got that wrong. See, because this isn't just Greek, it's Coptic Greek. And the Coptics are the closest thing to the ancient Egyptians." And so he pointed out, how these were a little different. And I was like, all right, I got to change them now. But I love that, how, all the players can enrich the world and really add so much to what you're doing.
Yeah. And that's just an incredible level of detail that you're able to draw upon from your experience in travels, and then of course bringing in experts and that sort of stuff. So it's really neat, and I truly think you get, or at least my expectations from Keshanar, because I'm also a backer, is that it's really going to give just like a fresh look at a fantasy setting, right? Something that when I sit down to run a game with it and get players going, it's going to feel different. You know what I mean? It's like a different suit of clothes that you're putting on than, which is cool, because a lot of, and more people are branching up, but a lot of our TTRPG stuff, fantasy TTRPG in particular, is mostly Western European based, right? And as awesome as that is, and that's great. I love lots of I love playing, classic Western mythos stuff. It's neat to get that twist, because you get the excitement of, what is that? What does that do? Uh-oh, I don't know. It's a sense of wonderment again. Oh, I don't know all the answers to this just by looking at and hearing the description of the thing. Uh-oh, I've got to do some exploring and figure out, is this thing really powerful? Is it kind of good, bad, and different? I mean, can I talk to it? Do I, what do I have to look out for this thing? Is it clever? Is it dumb? All that sort of stuff. Plus, neat architecture and cool costuming and stuff like that. New spells, and obviously environmental challenges. If it is Egypt, obviously the main river would be, the Nile, and that sort of stuff would be important. I'm sure there's something to do with that. And then deserty environs and things like that. So anyways, it's just tapping into a lot of stuff that you don't always get to do. And I was inspired a bit by not so much Egypt, but just the desert with my World Ogrim setting that I'm tinkering with myself these days. And that was just based on my travels to a less, certainly as historic location in Iraq, but I didn't do tourism. I did see the city of Ur, which was pretty cool, in the Temple of Sin there, which was pretty neat. And we had a professor from the University of Basra, I think, came out there and took us on a little tour, which was pretty cool. That was fun to do. But just the environmental challenges with being out in a hot desert, and how would you deal with that, and what kind of creatures would be. But anyway, it just gets your mind going. And so I guess when you're a nerd who likes to create stories in your mind, you have time, you start building on that sort of stuff, and then you go, "Wow, that's kind of neat. Man, yeah, maybe somebody would enjoy that." And then you find out how much work it is.
Oh man, it's so much work, but it's rewarding. So I have a question from the audience. They're asking about the drawing and how you don't have to enter. You've entered by attending the live stream, and what we're going to do is we're going to ask a trivia question at the end, and the first person to post the answer wins the badge for next year's GaryCon. I wanted to ask you, because you have run GaryCon now for 18 years?
17 years.
17. Next one's 18.
Next one's 18.
Yeah, and you've talk about keeping your finger on the pulse of the evolution of this industry, in addition to being really the kind of torchbearer of our hearts and minds of it. How have you seen it evolving, and like, what are some of the trends that you've seen recently that have jumped out at you in terms of how the industry is expanding, evolving?
Well, it's funny. I think what's to an extent, what's old is new again. So I think we've seen Well, okay. I started GaryCon in 2009, so there was no 5th edition D&D, right? It was Pathfinder. Things weren't as popular. There was still a committed, dedicated, hardcore, TTRPG community out there, but it was much smaller, right? 2014 hit. They came out with the 5th edition. Mike Merles and his team published the 5th edition then, and boy, that just started taking off. And we saw TV shows. I think kind of as people who grew up playing D&D started becoming more in charge. We'd seen obviously little bits of things in video games and books and that sort of stuff, but with Stranger Things and Critical Role and the accessibility of Twitch and more people watching YouTube, Twitch, etc., we started seeing it draw in more audience. And the 5th edition rules were pretty simple. I wouldn't say streamlined and easy to adapt. And instead of having to go and find someone to physically explain the game to you, you could watch people play on YouTube or whatever it is. And once you see people play the game, oh, I get it. Just trying to read the book is harder for me. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I would say our audience started expanding in 2014, and it became, it was more about the rule of cool, and let's do a lot of, more role playing and less of your, combat-y, hacky slash stuff, right? And it was fun. It was a little bit lighter. And I think that's system-wide, not just, fantasy TTRPGs, but generally the systems tend to be a little bit more simple. And, the D20 engine was popular for a lot of people. Then now I would say the audience, it's still big. Obviously you mentioned earlier, COVID and everyone locked down, having a bunch of free time.
Yeah,
we really gravitated. People came back to gaming. People gamed with their families. There's a very nice guy who I don't think he likes a lot of attention, so I won't say his name, but he helps support our GM rewards program, and it was really important for his family because he got his kids and nieces and nephews and his dad involved, and so it was a big giant family game of D&D that everybody learned how to play. He spread the love to everybody, and so he brings his whole family to GaryCon, extended family, and that's something they do together now, which is really neat. So we saw that, and now people are playing a lot of D&D, especially, right, and other games. And I think what the younger players who never went through the 80s, 90s, where it was more gritty, grim, dark, dungeon delving, hope we survive, action based, they're going, oh wait, there's a system that we're doing, whether it's Castles and Crusades or OSE or Dungeon Crawl Classics, whatever it may be, Swords and Wizardry, or just good old AD&D, right? Or Shadow Dark is another huge one that's really done very well and is smoothly run. They want that. Give me that. I want risk. I want my character to get, if we do, if the dice don't go well, it's okay for us to get splattered and have to start again, right? Or just run away and be happy that we survived. Oh my God, the tension is just, it's off the roof.
Yeah, I want to cry. I'm going to cry when my character dies. I mean, it's
Oh man, or what's almost worse is an old school D&D when you got hit by an undead,
or a wraith, and you lose a level. Oh,
yes, yeah,
that was brutal.
Or a vampire, I think, gets 2 levels out of you.
Yeah, so and it took so long to level up in AD&D.
Yes.
I have a good question.
So I think that's it. We've seen it kind of go from a little bit more clunky and wonky to very smooth and story focused, and now I think the pendulum swung back where we still want simple refined system, but maybe a little bit more grimdark and tension based, and also some random. People are liking the idea of having their own reasons for adventuring that maybe not everybody knows about, like their little secret subplot thing that they're doing. And whether they think an Alien had that with little cards that you would hand out where people were, you're here because you want whatever this thing is that may not always align with the party's needs. So there's little extra personality and special things for your character that can create some additional tension or opportunities to ally with people that you wouldn't have otherwise, but just little kind of plot devices.
Subtle
So
but
I think
important innovations.
Yeah. Oh, and people really love their knickknacks now. Their props and stuff. So very, very much more move towards VTTs, props, and that sort of stuff. I think across the board.
So I have an interesting question from the audience
Yeah.
that ties into that. So, what is your favorite system to run, and of all those, right? And which is your favorite edition to play?
Oh man, they're
Tough
each
one.
a little different. So it's AD&D is kind of what I cut my teeth on. So first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is good. Second edition is so close to first edition that I think we can kind of put them together. They're both great games. Don't tell Zev Cook I said that, but I think they're close enough that we can do good. And then of course, fifth edition has its charm because it's smooth. So if I want a smoother system, so really running and playing AD&D, it's good. I do like the tools that are available for 5e because that can make it quicker and easier to look things up and calculate stuff. So that's an advantage that makes it a little bit easier to GM. So I do like that. Shadow Dark is also great. And a game that is not as many people know about, games that not many people know about, but it's very good. It's kind of the spiritual successor to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Is Castles and Crusades. Troller Games created that system really for my dad to write in when he was working with them in like 2005, I think, or 6, or I can't remember when they started. And it has a siege engine system, an attribute check system, which is very, very, very similar to 5e, which was created in 2014. So either somebody saw it, was inspired by it, or they happened to kind of come up with it just at a little bit separate times. But yeah, Castles and Crusades is a great game. Shadow Dark's a great game. And of course, D&D is the kind of lingua franca for everybody. So I play a lot of D&D too.
Okay, no, I have an interesting question for you. If you had your own pet mimic, what would you train it to do? While you're thinking about that, right. I'll put the trivia, because we're getting a little bit close to the end. I'll put the trivia question out for everybody. And so here's the deal for winning the badge, everybody. Basically, the first person that comes up with the right answer in the chat wins the badge. And it is based on one of Luke's creation. What is the name of the ancient empire in Ikorum known for its mastery over elemental forces and eventual downfall? I'll repeat it. What is the name of the ancient empire in Ikorum known for its mastery over elemental forces and eventual downfall?
So my first thought was I would train that mimic to be like a floor mat in front of my door for when obnoxious people came and knocked on the door, whether that was Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or something like that, that could gobble them up. But I thought that wasn't very charitable, but I thought it was amusing. But perhaps a more useful would be to teach it to look like the refrigerator. So when my kids come home from school and they try to snitch the chocolate cake or an ice cream and mess up their dinner, maybe it would just hold them and have a little alarm go off, and I could be like, all right, kids, that's it. Stop stealing the cake.
That's funny that you say that, because the floor mat outside of my little dungeon room here is a floor mat says definitely not a mimic.
Yeah, see, that's good. Yeah, my dad loved to have cloakers and rugs of smothering and all that sort of stuff.
All right.
We got somebody. We got a winner?
Yeah, we got a winner. Wait a minute. No, we don't.
Okay.
They're coming. They're ticking through though. All right. Well, we'll let that run a minute. What were you thinking?
Oh yes, he loved he came up with some of those devices purely just to mess with specific players. You talk about your home campaign, right? And how you develop a storyline and things tailored to your group. Before, you didn't always have an identify spell, and identify because of the Vancian magic system. So for those who know, you had to memorize certain spells, and then if you wanted to figure out what an item was, or if it was magic, you'd have to detect magic to see it was magic, and then you had to figure out how to use it. One way was trial and error. So somebody might think, oh, it's a rug. Is it a flying rug? I'm going to sit on it and, command it sit in the center and command, fly or whatever. Well, of course, that's not going to happen. The rug of smothering is going to fold up on you instead and try to smother you. So
there it is. Mark is the winner.
That's it. Yep. I see it. Backloonish is good. That's Greyhawk. It's close. There's some similarities to the Backloonish. I'll give you that. and the sea of dust.
How do you pronounce that again? Ysidrid, right?
Idrisid.
Idrisid.
Like Idrisid.
Right. Excellent. All right. Congratulations to Mark, who also asked the question we got to answer earlier. So you've won a pass to the greatest D&D convention on earth, Gary Con, for next year.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. So awesome. I'm going to just make a couple of little announcements. We've got like 1 minute here left. We are so our next live stream is going to be on Monday, and that's going to be all about Unreal Engine City, 3D City. We're going to walk through it and kind of show people how it works and show how the maps work and go around all the different temples. We have 33 different temples to 33 gods of the thousands of Egyptian gods that we kind of chose as our starting lineup, for the Pantheon. They're all different, and talk about what inspired their kind of creation and development, and let people just sort of ask questions and drive around. And then we're going to do another live stream on Wednesday for all about kind of the mechanics of the new species and spells and things that we're getting more into the guts of it. And then following week, we're going to do one about the art, because that was a big journey for us to try to like take interesting elements like the kind of what makes Egyptian art so unique and encompass that into, like I said, artistic style for what we're doing in Keshanar. And also we just dropped our first one shot, which is called The Perfect Trap, and it's on DriveThruRPG, so folks can go and download it and get a real flavor for what a Keshanar one shot is. And that was tricky, actually. So because we don't want to give away stuff in the campaign. So what we do with the one shots is we have them play in the history of Keshanar. So you get to learn a little bit about the history and possibly even shape it, through things that happen as one shots in the history of it. So that's all coming up, and I think that's it. I don't think I missed anything. And so, Luke, can't thank you enough for coming. It's always a pleasure. You're a wealth of knowledge and true innovator in the space. And thank you for all the contributions that you make to the community. And look forward to seeing you at GaryCon, if not sooner. Are you going to any other cons this year?
Yeah, I'll be at UK Games Expo. I'm going to Isle of Wonder in Croatia. I'll be at KitsuneCon in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So I'll be there. I'm planning going to Gen Con. No Origins for me this year, but Gen Con, Dragon Con, I'll be a guest at Dragon Con, and then Game Hall. All
right. Well, I'll see you at I'll see you at Game Hall and Gen Con. Yeah, absolutely. But fantastic. So
and
thanks again.
It went by so fast. I don't believe it was an hour.
Yeah, I can't believe it either. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Luke. And look forward to seeing you at the cons in the near future. And, one last thing. What projects are you working on right now?
Well, my big thing coming out is going to be the World of Okrim setting book. So my Blighted Lands, that'll be out probably beginning of third quarter, and that's my main one. I'm also working on the Body by Gygax app, so that's in the first couple weeks of development. So I'm hoping that by Gen Con I'll be able to have like a little beta version, and essentially that's just kind of gamifying some fitness, gamifying fitness, so that I can encourage gamers to move and be with us a little bit longer and spend more time, more years around the gaming table with their friends.
Wow, what a great idea. All right. And you're going to Kickstarter this next project, setting book?
Not sure yet. Oh, the setting book will be either Kickstarter or backer kit. I haven't decided yet. So I'm a little behind on that, but I got to get cracking. You know how much work this is.
I know how much work it is.
It takes looking forward to months of planning.
It's incredible. And you're still up all night, the week before trying to get it all ready, no matter how much you plan.
Yep. It's true.
All right. Well, look forward to seeing this.
Good luck. Continued good luck with the Kingdom of Keshanar Kickstarter. And I look forward, like I said, to playing it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your support. Really appreciate it. And thanks for tonight. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining.